All right, everyone. In this final video in the series of videos here for the Chapter 2 to 4 test prep, we're going to take a look at the Chapter 4 test prep tab. And in this one, we're going to be kind of focusing in on the primary thing in Chapter 4 is the ABC's activity-based costing, and focusing in on overhead specifically and how to do some allocations with different cost pools, etc. Okay, so in problem number 1, it tells us that we have a company with 2 different products. So we have product A and B, and the company uses activity-based costing, and we have an analysis prepared below that shows budgeted costs and activity for each of these 3 different cost pools. So let's see here, see the analysis at the bottom of the instructions. So step 1, compute the approximate total overhead cost for each product over the budget period. Step 2, calculate the total cost per unit for each product. And then step 3, if traditional single plant-wide overhead method was used and the base was direct labor hours, what would the predetermined overhead rate be? Okay, so step 1, so we've got our 3 cost pools. You can see the drivers here, POs, square footage, and direct labor hours. And we have estimated total costs for the different pools. And let's see some additional information. So direct materials cost per unit of the 2 products, labor, and then it tells us how many units are going to be produced. So let's begin by totaling up the activity totals here essentially. So let's just say total. And I'm just going to merge these so you can kind of see that it relates to all of these. So we're just going to add together the amounts here. These are the individual, drivers per product, but this is the total, and we want the total because that's going to give us the rate. So to get the rate, we're just going to take the total cost divided by the total activity. Just kind of like we remember, like similar to what we've been doing with the traditional method, but we're just having 3 different overhead rates as opposed to just the one we had typically in Chapter 2, especially. We were looking at that most directly before. Okay, so then if this is our budgeted activity, I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. So then we can get overhead costs based on taking the rate times the individual amount of activity per, let me make this dollars, per product, right? So we're going to take our $15 rate times the individual amounts there, the $6.20 rate times the amounts, and then the $12. And let's just do the formatting. Okay, and then we don't want all that. We just want and this is going to be the budgeted cost, or the allocated cost, or kind of just like we did with our predetermined overhead rate. So total 242. You can see that matches the totals here. Let me do a summation column. Okay, so you can see the total costs are just being split out between the different products based on the amount of usage, of those drivers, essentially. How much activity, how many POs, how many square feet, how many direct labor hours per cost pool, essentially. So our total overhead then allocated to each product is these 2 numbers for product A and B. And then from there, we're going to, let's see, what is it? What do we want to do next? It says total cost per unit for each product. So then if we want to get the total cost per unit, we have the blanking on it here. Okay, the materials and the labor, but we need the cost per unit of overhead, essentially. So let's see where do I want to do this. I'm just gonna add a couple rows, and I'm gonna say overhead cost per unit. So we already know materials and labor above, and this is product A, and over here I'll do this so it matches. So this is the materials and labor, and then we want overhead. So to get the cost per unit, we've got the total cost, the cost total, but let's divide that by how many units we produce there. So 1,300. So then we get 79.15 for overhead per unit for B or A, and then 126.45 for product B. And then if we want to know the total cost for the products, adding all the relevant cost factors of material, labor, and overhead, then we just add those all together there, you can see. And we end up with $454.15 for product A and $601.45 for product B. And that's using the ABC method there, the activity-based costing. And remember, so we just had to allocate out the cost based on the drivers and then divide that total cost by the number of units to get the per unit cost, essentially. And then finally, it asks us if the traditional method was used and the base was 150,000 direct labor hours, what would be the predetermined overhead rate? And basically, to get there, we would just take our, and actually, it would be interesting to do a comparison. So if we're doing the traditional method, then how we were doing it with our predetermined overhead rate previously, we have total overhead here. So this is estimated overhead. Then we have our base, which is 150,000 direct labor hours. Okay. And then we take do our division. So for every direct labor hour, we are going to apply $1.61. So how many direct labor hours? So 93. So that basically just all based on this. So here let's do the same thing we did, but instead of using the ABC allocation method, we're going to use the traditional. So here at overhead cost per unit, we're just going to take the total dollars, and that way I guess we're going to have to do it like this. We're going to have to take dollar per hour times the total hours. Okay, so that would give us our total dollars then. And then we were going to take, let's see, let's take this divided by, or let's leave it there. So this is the total predetermined overhead rate times the amount of direct labor. This is the traditional method. And then we're going to take our total divided by the number of units. And you can see that is not anywhere close to what the totals would be from the ABC method, essentially. So it's, something like this where you've got a lot of costs and they're not using a lot of labor. It really kind of messes up the whole system, essentially. And this one's kind of funky. I don't even know if that actually works because we're saying the total hours was 7,750, but up here we're saying the base was 150,000. So I think these numbers are a little wacky. So I'm not sure that completely works, but it doesn't even tell us to do that, which I think is part of the problem, is that that's not really tying together very well. But more so, it just says if the traditional was used and this was the base, this is what we would be doing. Let's take the total cost divided by the base that they're giving us to get a per hour allocation method. So that's all you have to calculate there. So know how to do your predetermined overhead rate, know how to do your activity-based costing based like this, and you should be good to go. Okay, we've got a couple problems down here to answer. Let's see. Again, I think these are more just general and not so much specific to like the ABC above here for chapter 4, but instead this one just tells us the predetermined rate, overhead rate is 350% of direct labor costs, and the paying department's direct labor cost is $20,000. Write the entry to record the allocation of overhead to the products processed in the department. So this one's talking about in the departments. It's kind of I think this one's more of a process costing type of problem. But let's take a look at how to do that. So remember so they tell us what the predetermined overhead rate. So 350% of whatever direct labor cost is. So in this one, direct labor cost is $20,000. And let's say we can just say 3.5, which is the same thing as that's 350%, right? If we multiply those together, you get 70,000. So as far as a journal entry goes, our debit would be to WIP, and we could say painting department again because this one talks about department, so there might be more than one department in this whole manufacturing process. And remember, the overhead account is going to be credited for the applied overhead, not the actual overhead cost. Remember, because that's the stuff we compare at the end of the period and zero it out to cost of goods sold if we need to. But this is just the application, so the applied overhead using 350% of the 20,000. And just for good measure, we'll say to assign overhead. Okay, so that's a journal entry there. And then this one says, a company uses activity-based costing to determine the cost of its 3 products. Budgeted cost for activity 1 is $45,000. Budgeted activity for product A is $7,000, B is $15,000, C is $8,000. And what is the activity rate for cost 1? So we have product A. Geez, these are. Let me do it over here where it's columns. Right? So big A, B, and C. Let's write out what it's telling us here. Okay, so let's see, activity for product A is 7,000, 15,000, and 8,000. Let's add those together so we get total activity of 30,000. And then it says so whatever this activity is, it has 30,000, like up here we said POs or square feet or some driver, and let's say total. And then we know that the total budgeted cost for activity 1 is $45,000. So then for that specific activity, we would come up with a rate of $1.50. So then we'd go back and look and say, okay, it doesn't ask us to do this exactly, but if we wanted to figure out the overhead rate then for this specific activity, then we would just take the $1.50 in total and multiply it out by the amount of the activity that's applicable to each specific product that we produce, essentially. So 15,000 times $1.50, 8,000 times $1.50, and then yeah, that would give you your total overhead based on the specific activity related to that driver. And that's similar to what we did above. Here, we just did it with, instead of vertical as opposed to horizontal there, but we're taking the products, coming up with a rate, add the activity all together and then divide the activity to add all the activity together, take that total cost related to that activity, divide it by the number of your driver, and then use that rate that's produced to multiply back through by the applicable activity per product. So that's what we did above. This is just a little snippet of one part of that. There would be other cost pools. This would just be for like one activity, but if we're doing activity-based costing, we're assuming there's more than one activity overall. So, all right, well, hope that all helps and makes sense. Thanks again, and hopefully this gets you feeling prepared for our chapter 2 to 4 test, and I will see you in class. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.